All right. Well, I'm excited for our afternoon of two really exciting panels, and we're going to kick it off with the first panel on emerging energy opportunities in the Intermountain West. And our moderator for this panel is Matt Fry. He's the director of SERPA, which is the Center for Energy Regulation and Policy Analysis within the School of Energy Resources. So please join me in welcoming Matt.
Thank you, Temple, and thanks for the opportunity to do this. As was done previously, let me hand this. As was done previously, to give you all more time, I'm not going to do in-depth introductions, but I'll just let you know who our panelists are and what they're going to speak about, and then I'll turn the mic over to them. So going first will be Chris Petrie. He's the Deputy Chair of the Wyoming Public Service Commission, and he's going to talk with us about load growth, transmission capacity, and things of that nature. And then we're going to move to Joe Evers, President of Wyoming Rare, and he's going to give us an overview of the rare earth industry and the opportunities for Wyoming and the Mountain West, et cetera. Then we're going to go to Kelly Bott. She's the Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs at Purewest Energy. We're going to talk about natural gas markets and potential opportunities in the future for natural gas for Wyoming and globally, I should say. And then we're finally going to wrap up with Cindy Delancey. She's of Counsel and Government Affairs Director at Holland and Hart. And she's going to talk with us about what developers new to Wyoming need to know, which is an interesting topic right now. So with that, I will pass it to Chris. Each is going to speak for about 15 minutes. I have some canned questions because being personally invested in this and kind of selfish, I have the microphone and I want to get answers to them, and then we'll pass it off to the audience. So appreciate your opportunity to speak here, and have at it, Chris.
Thank you, Matt. This isn't wet blanket material that I'm about to give you. It's just supposed to be background and context primarily. I don't know how many are familiar with the Wyoming Public Service Commission at all. It's often been a little bit obscure. We are charged with regulating public utilities in the state. We have the general and exclusive power to regulate and supervise public utilities. I just found the first error in my slides. Regulate and supervise. The commission is a 3-member commission. The commissioners are appointed by the governor, and they serve 6-year staggered terms. So every 2 years, a commissioner comes up for reappointment or is replaced. Our main activities are the regulation of the electric, gas, and water utilities, also interstate transportation pipelines, and a little bit of telecommunications. The point of it all is to make sure that we have safe, adequate, and reliable service at just and reasonable rates throughout the state of Wyoming. Most of these utilities are readily spotted for being natural monopolies, and so the object of the Commission's regulation is to simulate the beneficial effects of competition while avoiding the downside, which would be economic waste and harmful competition where there's a natural monopoly. And of course, to make sure that these monopolists do not take undue advantage of their situation. That's the just and reasonable rates part. Just and reasonable rates mean that the utility has an opportunity to recover its prudent expenses, like operations and maintenance expenses, and also a fair opportunity to earn a return on its investment. And beyond that, the safe, adequate, and reliable bit sort of speaks for itself. One of the main components of the regulatory landscape for us is that we make an effort, and a really serious effort when it comes down to it, to follow a cost causation principle to make sure that the utilities rates align the causing of costs with the paying of costs. So that's why different types of customers have different rate structures. That's why different groups of customers are separated into classes. So this is probably a little bit too basic, but I did want to touch on it. When people talk about the grid, they might mean different things. Broadly speaking, it's everything from the meter at your house or your business on back through the system, transmission lines, transformers, substations, generation plants. Also in that mix are controls. The grid is a very large, complicated machine, and there are very sophisticated, necessary control operations that are needed to make sure that we have power quality and sufficiency and safety. When we talk about transmission, and I guess the point of today is to talk about in Wyoming, we have several transmission owners, and you can see them here, and I don't need to name them all off. You got a couple at the top there that are investor-owned utilities. In the Middle Basin and Tri-State, these are generation and transmission cooperatives who are comprised of distribution cooperatives. So if you're not a Pacific or Black Hills or a Montana Dakota customer in Wyoming, you'd end up being a customer of a local cooperative. These are the rural electric cooperatives. The rural electric cooperatives are affiliated with Basin and Tri-State. There's a few smaller exceptions, but those are co-ops, formed of co-ops. They own power plants, transmission lines. For the most part, the distribution cooperatives stay out of the high-powered transmission. They'd be 69 kV and low and below for the most part. Western Area Power Administration, that's a federal entity that is not regulated or controlled. None of their planning or anything is in the control of the states. And there are also some merchants and potential merchants that, and by merchant I mean a non-regulated utility transmission owner. So there's a lot of talk lately. I've got this in here, and you can see there's a red arrow on the Hoover Dam, just in case you get it mixed up with anything else. But a lot of proposals and plans and projects that are under discussion in the last several years, we're talking about really big amounts of power. And so people talk about data centers that may be a gigawatt, 500 megawatts. And I just put this in here so that we'd have sort of a concept when we finish here today, unless you already had one, of what they're actually talking about. So Hoover Dam, 2,000 megawatts, that's 2 gigawatts. So when you're talking about this kind of power requirement, it's great to keep in mind that these are really big facilities. The quantities of power that are under discussion are really large. This is the furthest thing from trivial as far as the planning, paying for, building of the grid is concerned. You see there the total generation capacity in Wyoming, 10,000 megawatts, about the same as the peak demand from New York City. And then the Pacific or their peak system demand at 11,000 megawatts. Of course, Wyoming is not the entirety of the Pacific Core service territory, about 15%. So that's just to give you an idea about what kind of scale we're talking about. This image is the tower from the Gateway Transmission Project. That's a Rocky Mountain Power Pacific Core project. And that is the sort of infrastructure that it takes to carry and deliver megawatt scale power. The statutory and rules structure for that would apply to transmission development projects is relatively simple. The statutes require that the Public Service Commission either, that in the case of significant facilities, that the company is going to need a certificate of public convenience and necessity from the commission, meaning that the commission has been convinced that the current or future public convenience and necessity, not literal necessity, but likely necessity, the public good, requires the construction of the project. It gets into the commission's rules, also pretty simple. Beyond what's stated here in the commission's rules of chapter 3, section 21, you'll have an application, a list of requirements for the application elsewhere in the rules that requires a description of the project, explanation of cost, explanation of financing, expectations on revenue, start and completion dates, potentially different phases of construction, and all of this is specified in the commission rules. All of this, of course, is considered in a contested case context, a administrative procedure contested case project process. So there's notice, opportunity for hearing, opportunity for public comment, and opportunity, of course, for any interested parties to become interveners. Projects 69 kV and above are generally considered major facilities that end up requiring a certificate of public convenience and necessity if they're in excess of 3 miles. And that's really about the end. I haven't kept track of the time. Matt, how much
Well,
time do we
you
have?
actually did a fantastic job of time management, so I appreciate that. And now we'll pass it on to Joe to talk about rare earth.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Joe Evers, alum of the University of Wyoming, and I'm here to talk about rare earths. I'm with a company called American Rare Earths. Our subsidiary is called Wyoming Rare, and that's the project level development entity, and we're working on a project pretty close to here in between Laramie and Wheatland. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But this is something that's kind of in the news a little bit, so I wanted to take a higher level and just break it down a little bit and talk about what are rare earth elements, why do they matter, and what are we doing to solve the national risk and the global risk here in the state of Wyoming. So, if anybody doesn't have nightmares from high school or college chemistry, let's throw the periodic table up there. Uniquely, rare earth elements are their own subset of the periodic table, and not that you can read that from there. They're highlighted here, and the reason that I wanted to call them out was to show you where they are on the periodic table and allude a little bit to the fact of what makes them, from a chemistry standpoint, challenging to deal with, because they're located together for a reason. They're often found in baskets, and a little bit of that is challenging when we go to process them. But there's also an important designation that you might hear about in the macro scale. People talk about light rare earths and they talk about heavy rare earths. And really the designation there is just a little bit about how they fit into the end industrial use. So a lot of these we call them magnet metals, and your praseodymium, neodymium, terbium, and dysprosium that are highlighted on the chart. To the left are the light rare earths. To the right are the heavy. The heavy are they're less common, more challenging to process, and also have a higher value in the product chain when you go to hopefully sell these items. The heavies are really useful and important from a national defense perspective, and the lights are also important and in the magnet metal scenario and used more in the motor type of situation, magnets that spin together, and everybody has one in their pocket today with your cell phone or your computer on your desk. Basically anything in modern life that we can shrink down, put in our pocket, and use generally benefits from rare earth elements, facilitating the shrinking, but maintaining the power on your cell phone to move the diaphragm on the microphones and in your headphones like that. So as part of the what are the rare earths, what are they used for? kind of alluded to that. This is about as lame and generic as a photograph as you could get, but it really does distill it down there. Important in technology, important in national defense, and pretty much every little facet that we take for granted. Part of the reason why they're in the news so much lately, especially, this kind of goes to the why do they matter. Basically, all you need to take away from these graphs are the dark blue is China, the light is everyone else in the world. So the Chinese economy controls the global rare earth supply. And what are we reading about in the newspapers? Every time we turn on the TV, we've got this trade war going on. And one of the unique facets that seems to be in every conversation are the exports of rare earths from China. So we see a little bit of those being constricted. And I think for me, there's a big issue here, both from an economic standpoint and a national defense one. Interestingly, in a country and a state that's so abundant with natural resources, there's currently only one producing rare earth mine in the nation, and it's kind of in the crook of California and Nevada where they come together. It's called the Mountain Pass Mine. It's been in production for a very long time, and it has been recently in the news as we saw the Department of Defense or War take a direct partnership and an equity stake and really seek, in my opinion, the federal government steps in and says, we are really going to take an active role in solving this supply issue for rare earths, for our economy and our national defense. Again, the export controls from China, I think, are interesting, both as the kind of back and forth in the trade rhetoric and the, I guess, trade war, but also what the Chinese government has done. If you go back and read some of these specific curtailments, they've kind of protected the vertical supply chain and the value proposition of what the commodities or the minerals feed into the manufacturing and feed into an end product. And my read of the controls is kind of saying, we're going to protect the whole chain and you can purchase the end product that has the highest value. We don't want to let the raw materials leave the supply chain because you could benefit from them further. There's a lot of curtailments around if the technology that would benefit from the rare earth elements may be used in any type of national defense for an adversary of the Chinese government. Another important big macro announcement that you might have seen in the news was from JP Morgan, not a small bank, but they made a public announcement that said they're going to come into this space in a big way and make direct investments into the rare earth element space, the critical material space, AI, and some other things. So that has really caused some interesting things from the investment space for rare earths, and Wyoming is at the crossroads of that. The next facet of that slide, I just wanted to put something up there to kind of break down the different processes that are necessary to go from a rock in the ground to the end use, the end good. Somewhat similar to oil and gas that I think everybody can wrap their minds around. You have an upstream component, a midstream component, and a downstream component. And there's a lot of potential on the upstream, but we've seen a lot of incentives kind of focus on the midstream and the downstream. So that's the taking the commodity-based rare earths and turning them into the precursors for magnets, then turning them into magnets and putting them into an end use. I'll take a little bit of a break and kind of highlight something I think that's important and unique to Wyoming in the public-private partnership space. Wyoming is at the forefront of almost every facet of this. There's 3 different projects going on in the state in each different corner. With each product, another thing to keep in mind with the rare earths that's interesting, at least to me, each rock that you would find the rare earths hosted in has a different kind of chemical signature, which requires a different chemical engineering equation to solve. So we can't quite bundle everything together and process from a commodity point forward. And that's something to keep in mind, I think, as the industry continues to develop. That's a place where I think there'll be a big value unlocked. But just here at the university, there's a ton of synergy The Wyoming Energy Authority has taken an active role in both advancing the technological understanding, but advancing the actual projects. So what, in my opinion, why is that important to Wyoming? Because the return on investment is the taxes, the royalties, the jobs. So it's not a one-sided equation, in my opinion. But it goes even further than that. I think in Wyoming, we always talk about economic development, especially when commodity prices are low. But Carol Frost, I'm going to shout you out. I've never met you in person, but I want you to know your legacy runs really deep at the company that I work at. And for the rest of the room, the first person or people to understand that there was a potential for rare earth mineralization in this geologic resource was Carol and her associate at the University of Wyoming, probably in the mid-90s, correct? So that's an investment from the state's perspective that is now, we're still working on that value that you created, and it's exciting to see you in person. So yeah, Frost and Frost comes up a lot at the office. We need to give you a plaque or something. Anyway, that's a tangible connection to the university. So I'm going to just really briefly switch over to the next aspect here. What are we doing about it in Wyoming? I said there's several projects. You got one in the northeast part of the state, one in the north central part of the state, and I want to talk to you about the one here in the southeast corner that we're working on. We call it the Halleck Creek Project, and we've got two separate and independent phases of potential development here. The first phase we call the Cowboy State Mine, but for this room, just know that it's on 100% state of Wyoming owned surface and state of Wyoming minerals. So that's a little different than the mining law of 1872 where we have claims. So we have a real mineral lease with the state. But I'm usually talking to folks that have no concept of what a section of land is or 1 square mile. So this is very refreshing that you guys, so we have 640 acres, 1 square mile. And that resource that we see there is a life of mine potential of 20 years. And if we have the opportunity to move on to the ancillary lands, the adjacent lands there, we think it has even more in the span of around 80 years. So together, a potential for 100 years plus. And why is that important? Again, there's only the one mine. There's a ton of work being done on the midstream and the downstream in the states. But I think folks have kind of glossed past the mining portion of where we're going to get this resource. And I think that's something that Wyoming is very uniquely situated to solve, and why we believe that we're the next producing rare earth element mine to come online here in the United States. I think I just can't say enough good things about doing business in the state of Wyoming, but you all get it. It's old hat. We live it and breathe it and appreciate the opportunity here. So I know I ran through a lot. I wanted to kind of keep it at the high level, but I love talking about this stuff. And so if anybody has any questions following on, I'd be happy to take them.
Excellent. Thanks, Joe. Once again, great time management. So we've got time for questions going on. So go ahead, Kelly.
Okay, I'll talk fast. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kelly Bott. I'm the Senior VP of Corporate Affairs for Purewest. We are the company formerly known as Ultra, and in 2021, we rebranded as Purewest with a vision to be the most responsible and profitable Rockies-focused natural gas company. So we're a lean shop, we're low cost, but we're very, very focused on safety, environmental performance, community support, all of those things that really, really matter. We operate out of the southwest corner of the state. We produce about 600 MMBTU of gas per day. That is sold into premium Western markets, which we very much love. We expect demand to continue to rise. As you can see, there's a number of coal retirements, gas plant conversions. Also want to point out in Baja, Mexico, the Costa Azul LNG export facility that's coming online in 2026. And we're all keeping close eye on that. So our field is in southwest Wyoming, the Pinedale Anticline field. We operate on primarily federal lands, which means we're subject to NEPA. We have year-round development authorized under the Pinedale Anticline Supplemental Environmental Impact Statement Record of Decision. That ROD was very, very groundbreaking in 2008 and has proven to be very durable 17 years in with plenty of running room left. It's adaptive management based, so very flexible, which has been really, really great to work with. There's protections for basically all the important resources, but very much focused on wildlife, air, water, Also, a $36 million operator proffered mitigation fund as part of that record of decision, with tens of millions of dollars going to on-the-ground projects to date. So really proud of that. Our field is not within sage-grouse core, but we do have sage-grouse leks, so we have to mitigate and work around those. We've got big game habitat. The newly designated pronghorn corridor crosses our field, and so keeping close tabs on that and doing exciting and fun things like fencing conversions and avoidance. Excuse me. I did want to spend just a minute talking about the ozone situation. So in 2012, the area was designated as non-attainment for the 2008 ozone standard of 75 parts per billion. Since that time, EPA has come out and said it's attaining the more stringent standard of 70 parts per billion, but that's really due to a tremendous amount of work that has happened in the area. Basically, and Todd and Nancy are here, so I have to be very careful that I'm accurate with this, but basically what we have is a cold pool situation. So we've got tight inversions, low wind speeds, we've got mountains surrounding that basically creates a pot out there. Snow cover that reflects all of the ozone precursors and cooks them into ozone, and so we had an ozone situation out there that really was first detected in the winter of 2005 and 2006. DEQ did not sit on their laurels. They brought a group of industry and community members together, and the first step was the release of the 2008 interim policy. That interim policy allowed us to offset our emissions anytime we applied for a new emissions permit on a 1.1 to 1 ratio for NOx and a 1.5 to 1 ratio for VOCs. Can't believe I'm going to say this out loud, but thanks to the ozone situation, we were able to get ahead of the curve when it came to carbon management. And so when all of this started emerging in recent years, we had a really good footprint on the greenhouse gas space. From an engineering perspective, we've got a liquids gathering system. So you can see the chart on the left. It's a little bit apples and oranges because this is greenhouse gas and I've been talking about ozone. But you can see most of our emissions are coming from our pneumatic devices. We don't have tanks in the field thanks to our liquid gathering system, and that can be a significant source of emissions. So really, really happy about that. We've been working really hard on commingling approvals, excuse me, that allow us to mix fluids from different leases. And then we can consolidate equipment, we can remove emission sources and further chip away at our emissions. On the pneumatics that you can see, this is still the biggest chunk of our emissions out there. We are working towards zero emission Quad O B and Quad O C compliant pneumatics. We understand and we're expecting that there will be significant changes or rescissions for the Quad O B and Quad O C, which are really focused on greenhouse gas and climate change. But we're continuing to move forward with that work and really just get some more gas put into the pipe. We've got a rigorous leak detection and repair program. 56% of our inspections are voluntary. Our time to repair a leak when we find one is less than half a day, so really proud of that. And where I want to spend the rest of my time talking is about this MMRV concept: measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification. And this really makes up our differentiated gas program. And you may have heard the term differentiated gas, or responsibly sourced gas, or responsibly produced gas, or verified low emissions gas, or my favorite of all, Gucci gas. But what it's really all about is proving what's coming out of our field, what those emissions look like, and making sure that data is really, really rigorous. So our MMRV program is multi-pronged. So we start with modeling at the facility basis on a real-time basis using this mass balance concept. We believe that has accuracy of about plus or minus 5%. And then at the same pad where we're doing that modeling work, we've got a monitor on location so that if there's any excess emissions that we miss in the modeling, we can add those back in. And that's called reconciliation. From there, the methodology, the data, the results are all packaged up and sent to a third party where they verify it against the ISO 14067 standard. That standard is important for Purewest because it's an international standard and really allows end users to leverage the data for their own emissions accounting. Really proud of our stats. I won't read them to you, but they're 85 to 95% ahead of industry averages. We're also trying to keep an eye on our water intensity, also industry leading, but this is really emerging as an important issue for folks like data centers. From there, all of that data is pushed to the blockchain, and that blockchain is important to maintain the integrity of that data. When we tokenize the data, what's generated is an environmental attribute certificate on a 1 MMBTU basis. So that that energy attribute or environmental attribute certificate reflects temporally matched emissions associated with the production of that MMBTU of gas. All of that is captured on the blockchain to ensure transactability, no double selling, all of those things that are really the benefits of leveraging the blockchain. These EACs can either be packaged up and sold with our gas, or they can be decoupled and sold separately on kind of a book and claim, or you might hear trace and claim basis. That book and claim basis allows buyers to leverage whatever supply of natural gas they might be close to them and then take credit for our emissions performance. So who's buying this stuff? And where's the demand coming from? Obviously, in this country, there's a big push toward deregulation, but the drivers are still there. The European Union has methane rules that are phasing in requirements for MMRV and limiting methane for imports. The Asian markets are working on voluntary and semi-voluntary frameworks, including Japan, who has their clean initiative really focused on LNG abatement. We're already seeing contracts for LNG, long-term contracts that include MMRV data or commitment for MMRV data. And something surprising happened after the first of the year. I kind of thought this market was maybe going to dwindle out, but no such luck. My phone's been ringing off the hook with interest in this stuff. We've done a couple of transactions with a methanol producer who's selling into the European market. Had conversations with fertilizer industry, manufacturing industry. There's some really fun ones there, but I can't tell you about those. But it's exciting, like the range of interest that we're seeing on this. The IMO released new shipping regulations earlier this year that includes methane requirements and MMRV requirements. And there's domestic demand as well. We're still hearing from a lot of corporations that have set net zero targets and are looking for more common sense ways to achieve those. We believe there's a potential role in the 45Z clean fuel production credit as the IRS is working on finalizing that implementation guidance. We've had a lot of conversations with trading desks who are setting up EAC programs that are specific to the natural gas industry. And as I mentioned, the book and claim approach, we're starting to see that really gain traction, which makes sense because when you're talking about climate change, you're not talking about a local problem, you're talking about a global problem. And so those reductions achieved anywhere really just work for the climate change mitigation. We've got a couple of creative partnerships that I'm really proud of. The first one I'll share with you is Gunvor. They are an international energy commodities trading company. And we are working with them to blend our verified low emission natural gas with renewable natural gas. The reason that works is that RNG, it's carbon negative, but it's also really, really expensive. So by blending it with our product, we can achieve a carbon negative or carbon neutral product at a much friendlier price point. And then the partnership I'm most proud of was with our friends and neighbors in the southwest part of the state. I think y'all heard from Prometheus earlier today, and so Purewest is hoping that we get to be the ones to deliver them fast and reliable, verified low carbon energy. And what that does is it allows their tenants who have net zero targets to start with a smaller starting point before they have to go out into the carbon offset world. So I kind of think of EACs, they function a lot like carbon offsets, but they're actually insets. What that means is that we're actually making reductions from the supply chain itself, so that when we get to the finish line, when the buyer ultimately needs to offset their emissions, they have a much lower starting point. So it's a common sense solution, it's cost effective, really excited about this partnership. And I will just close with a shameless plug for our corporate responsibility report. You're welcome to check it out and read about all the fun stuff we're working on.
Excellent, thanks. Cindy, please share with us what people need to know as they come to Wyoming.
Well, thank you, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with all of you today. It's an absolute delight. It is hard, I will admit, it is hard to be on a panel after Governor Friedenthal speaks. You know, I mean, that's just a tough spot in the agenda, but I'll do my best. So before I do that, I just wanted to give a shout out to my colleagues in the audience. Dessa Reimer and Isaac Supvin are here, and these are two folks that I enjoy working with immensely and work very closely with them in my practice. My practice is very different than their practice. My practice basically centers around helping developers find their way. Many people are very interested in Wyoming for all the reasons that we've just heard, and a lot of them just simply don't know how to do business effectively in Wyoming, and that's what my role is to try to help them navigate a very complicated landscape, not only locally, but nationally. So with that, I guess we'll just jump right in, and I'll try to roll right through here. But, you know, I kind of like to start at the beginning. For me, that's usually an easy place to start. But, you know, Wyoming is very unique in the sense that, you know, being the 9th largest state with the least amount of people, when a developer comes here, that is something that is an education process right from the beginning, that we don't really quite fit in many of the other places that others have operated in. And I'm so fortunate with the people that I work with. They really embrace that and lean into that and really want to understand our custom and culture. You know, and I kind of just try to keep things pretty simple, but to really get the point across, to explain that we have more cattle than people in Wyoming, and that's the way we like it, you know? And they just kind of look at me like, that's an interesting factoid about Wyoming, and really also to help them understand that really our open space drives our economy. So that's where siting of projects, how we handle the landscape, and just what industrial development looks like is very, very important to us, because we do love our open space and we do love where we live. So again, keeping it very simple for folks, you know, kind of my introductory comments with a lot of folks that I work for is, I explain to them that this is really the roadmap to success in Wyoming. If you follow these 10 principles, chances are you're probably going to be able to find your way pretty easily. If you disregard these 10 principles, good luck. Because these are just, you know, principles that we as Wyomingites hold very dear to us. In fact, the legislature adopted this as our code of conduct for our state. So if you're not familiar with the Code of the West, I highly encourage that you become very well acquainted with it, especially if you want to do any kind of large scale development in Wyoming. I often get asked, you know, what's my favorite one of these principles, and I can't quite, because I love them all the same. But you know, I just really think that one thing that truly matters in our spaces as professionals and developers is number 6: when you make a promise, keep it. You know, and I really think it's important for folks from other parts of the country and other parts of the world to realize that principle in Wyoming, that we cannot overpromise and underdeliver. It's very, very important, and it's something that we hold very, very dear to us. All right, you know, so I put this slide up here to kind of really show, and I get to speak quite a bit, and I love when I get to go someplace outside Wyoming and explain that, you know, in Wyoming, we have our cake and eat it too. You know, we have world-class wildlife, the cleanest air, the cleanest water, but we have so much. We're so blessed with so much energy, raw materials, and energy as our business. So we can have it all, and we do have it all, and it's the good work by our leaders and the vision, like listening to Governor Friedenthal talk and being, you know, along with Temple as a lot of those things unfolded many years ago. You know, like we are really well positioned because of the good work of our leaders in the past. And then when you layer in with our regulators and the steward and care of the companies and how everyone works together, it's really positioned Wyoming to be the envy of all. But you know, we're producing 12 times more than the energy we consume. So, you know, energy is our business. There's a lot of desire to start using some of the energy that we are exporting here in our state, and that's, you know, we're just evolving into that space as we have, as Commissioner Petrie discussed, you know, these enormous amounts of load requests. And, you know, it's a period of evaluation and how we do that. So I'm not going to go through all these statistics, but you know, I mean, how blessed we are that we're not just the leader in one area. We lead in so many areas: coal, trona, uranium, oil and gas, wind. And then there's room for more, you know, as we're looking at new energy resources to bring on to this fantastic, you know, envious portfolio that we have in Wyoming. It's just something that we really have to give careful consideration and lean into. And as Governor Friedenthal was saying too, you know, not be so risk adverse that we miss opportunities, because, you know, we're given a point in time right now where we can really set ourselves up for success for future generations, as we've done so well in Wyoming, or really kind of stay at a standstill. So, you know, it is exciting to hear about the Rare Earths Project. You know, it's just it's such an honor to sit on a panel with Joe. I too am a proud graduate of the University of Wyoming College of Law, and to come back and be able to speak to some of the students is just a real treat for me. So now we kind of get into this, when I help people understand that things aren't always as they seem. We have plenty to go around, right? That's what I hear all the time. Well, Wyoming has so much energy. Why can't we do this? Or what's the bottleneck? And it is hard because we are among some of the highest energy consumers in the nation. Our industries use a lot of power. That's what causes a cost of doing business, and our low population. It's hard when this pencils out because so many of our infrastructure needs are enormously expensive for a population that we have. A base case that I often talk about to try to bring this into scale with people is like the cost to run an airport in our state is enormous, but we just, we don't have enough people, like the flow doesn't pencil out. So that's where we need to look to outside partners to help, help that. But people come and evaluate Wyoming for projects and they see us on paper and look at these exponential numbers and they just, can't, it really takes a lot of thought and conversation about how to wrap their mind around how to use the resources that we have successfully, because as it's interesting that we heard from Mr. Thornock this morning, Wyoming has what developers want. And again, having that, we have 4 investor-owned utilities, 18 retail co-ops, and 3 municipally owned utilities. Our power, how we're able to accommodate some of the large load requests we're getting is difficult, and trying to help developers come and understand that the power isn't quite what they think it's going to be. The water isn't maybe quite what they think it's going to be. The land isn't quite what they think it's going to be. So we'll just continue on with kind of going through all this. And so now the question has become for many, developers that, in their need to know space, they often go, well, if we can't get the enormous loads that we want, can we bring our own? And, they're just kind of, there's this disconnect at times to understand that things are, again, in a period of that why this can't happen just as readily available as sometimes developers often think is, supply chain problems. We have oversubscribed transmission lines. We're growing, and that's exciting that we're growing, but our infrastructure isn't been able to grow along with us for a variety of different reasons. Mainly we've heard a lot, and Matt and I work a lot on this, not in my backyard. Thankfully, some of the infrastructure we have has been permitted and cited for many decades. I would only shudder to think what would happen if we tried to build some of the infrastructure that we have today. I'm not sure how many of you hang out in public meetings like I do, but there are times that I'm very concerned for my safety because people are so emotional about these topics. And really helping, our industrial developers come and understand, that this is such a degree of sensitivity. And yes, if you want to serve yourself, you can, and there's mechanisms through the Public Service Commission, and we're so happy to have such capable commissioners here in Wyoming navigating that. But there's some discussion about this kind of third-party generation question, and that's what's being looked at now. The Energy Authority, John Jenks, Kara Fornstrom have been really doing a fabulous job, and if anyone's interested in this topic, I encourage you to talk with them because they have really dug in and learned quite a bit and have tried to be a beacon and a resource for us as we navigate these complexities as far as how do we meet the needs of an emerging economy in such an exciting way. So this will likely come to fruition here in a couple different arenas. Likely the legislature in the budget session will probably have some discussion around that, but it will continue to come. Carrying on, the other thing that developers need to know is this. We hold our water very, very dear to us. And you better have a plan, because that's the first thing you're going to be asked when somebody wants to do industrial development. Where is your water coming from? And the answer of, I don't know, not going to work. So that's where, I spent a lot of time trying to help people get the right resources to do that analysis, to figure out from day one how to communicate and come up with a solid water plan that comports with our, existing body of Wyoming water law. And again, I was very fortunate to listen to my friend in the audience there, Mr. Wolf, spend his career working on water law in Wyoming as a law student. Listening to Larry teach water law is just something that always had such a meaningful impact on me, and maybe that's why my antenna's up so much to this today for my clients. Okay, so again, land, power, water, land. That's what people feel that are the three essential ingredients. And they look and say, wow, ninth largest state, so much wide open space, lots of room to build and grow, right? And I put the question mark there because not so fast, it's very complicated. It's not just we have all this land to do whatever we want and we don't need to give a care about how we do it. Wyoming landowners are extremely passionate about their land. I mean, you want to get somebody in a lather, just go ahead and start talking about what you're going to do on somebody else's land. It's very, very important to have just basic conversation with your neighbors. I was chatting with someone this morning about how that's kind of become like a lost art, just to talk to your neighbor and just be kind and let them know and maybe ask. It goes a really, really long way when you have a supportive neighbor as opposed to an unsupportive neighbor. And it's so important to know your ordinances, your county land use and zoning resolutions, as well as state statutes. So there's very prescriptive, different layers of regulation. And again, to go back to the comments from Governor Freudenthal, local's not quite the same as the state. And to understand those nuances for many companies, it's very important that they do have that ability to work with a town council or a county commission, and then going to work with our state regulatory framework. So industrial siting, that obviously is definitely something that the folks that I work with have on their radar screen. Nancy and Todd are here today, so I don't even want to begin to talk about their world, but they're exceptional partners, very knowledgeable. They love Wyoming the way we do, and they want to see things go, comport with their mission and statutes, and they're very, very helpful. So if the chances are, if you're doing large-scale industrial site or industrial development and you have a project over the 283 million mark, you're going to get to know the industrial siting folks and Dr. Staben very well. So this is your data centers, wind farms, solar farms, rare earths, et cetera, when they meet those jurisdictional levels that they come into play with getting to know the folks over at industrial siting. So here's just kind of my little laundry list for the takeaways. Wyoming's like no other place in the world, and you will absolutely enjoy your time here. But relationships matter in Wyoming. Know your neighbor, cite your project in the right place, and most importantly, be a good corporate citizen and a good neighbor. Find solutions, share positive ideas, be flexible and creative. We have the ability to do so much here, even though there's so few of us. Hire someone to help you work on your project that's actually worked in Wyoming and help you go through those kind of hidden landmines. And, people are very, very tied to their land, and they care deeply of what their neighbors are up to. We know our elected officials. We talk to them all the time. Get to know them. They want to hear what's going on. I've yet to meet a politician that likes a surprise, especially a surprise in public. So, and if you're not from Wyoming, we get a little sensitive when we hear about how you've done it in Texas or elsewhere. We're different, and we like being different. That's not going to change. So kind of become different with us. Know and follow your rules of the road, locally and statewide. Identify your land, power, water source early, and clearly communicate what your plan is. Don't let other people tell the story for you. You need to tell your own story. Join and engage in your industry trade associations and get involved in public service. Be on that board, be in that community space. Donate your time. Encourage your employees to donate your time. That's really how you get to really learn the fabric of your community, but kind and gracefulness really goes a long way in our state. So that's my takeaways for doing business and development in Wyoming.
Excellent. Thank you all for setting the foundation to what I hope can be a conversation now, because I certainly have questions, and I hope others do as well. I think that we could probably all agree this is a very unique time in the country. Like, I've been working in this space for over 15 years in Wyoming, nationally, and for other countries, and we've traditionally been considered like the place to do business, this country, this state. And I don't know, we'll see how that moves into the future. As Travis Deti mentioned this morning, there's tremendous opportunities currently that we're potentially able to pursue to expand our energy and our other industrial processes and businesses, there's also a lot of challenges, so, or perceived challenges. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask a few questions and I'm going to focus on what those challenges or perceived challenges are, and I'll go down the line, just kind of like we did before. So the first one I'll start with is you, Chris. So if we do see the level of demand growth projected as we read in the news kind of daily right now, does Wyoming have the regulatory structure in place to develop the necessary infrastructure to accommodate that demand increase?
Thanks, Matt. You know, there's a lot to that question. First of all, there's immense uncertainty as to what those projections and predictions actually will amount to. It's really hard, particularly with data centers, to understand what is actually going to emerge. Utilities plan and build their infrastructure on a scale of decades. They file an integrated resource plan with us. That's their internal and public planning document for how they'll meet the demands of their customers into the future. And that is becoming a more and more challenging and difficult exercise because of the increased difficulty of predicting it. As far as Wyoming's capacity to, and the Wyoming utilities' capacity to deal with large load increases, I think that we're fortunate that we do have a predictable, known regulatory regime. If, for example, transmission or generation projects are necessary, I think it's relatively easy to see what stands in your way if that's part of your project. And I think that the state has a great track record of accommodating growth and demand in territories, whether it's a rural electric co-op or the larger investor-owned utilities. They do have the capacity to do it. We've also been pretty successful, if that's the term that suits your vision, in the building of renewable generation facilities. We've got a lot of wind development in the state. All that wind development comes along with some amount of transmission build that has to be done to accommodate that and connect it to the grid. Industrial siting in the Public Service Commission process is well known and predictable and within limits, and I guess nobody really knows for sure where those limits are. I do think that some of these large loads can be accommodated. Of course, there are variables like the time scale that the development requires and the location. Some things are mobile. Data centers have a relatively decent mobility capacity. They can choose a site. They don't necessarily have to go any particular place. Whereas our friends in the rare earth minerals business, they have to be where the minerals are. And so there are some variables and some projects might not fly, but I think generally speaking, Wyoming is situated to succeed with those projects.
Excellent, thank you. And Joe, rare earth materials, they are not on any hit list that I've seen in the near future. It's still pretty widely accepted and appreciated in our current political arena. So with that in mind, what additional, if anything, could Wyoming do from a technical or a policy perspective to further support your industry?
I think Wyoming has been great at nearly every level of government and regulation and community. This isn't quite at the heart of your question, but I think it's an interesting opportunity for the state. And it's as we have for generations, if we have the commodities here, how can we put value add propositions together to capture the next facets of the supply chain. I think that is becoming more and more important on a national scale. And you know, some of the examples that Purewest covered, we have that opportunity in Wyoming, and maybe it's a generational one. And I think there's some people thinking about that, especially folks at the University of Wyoming, and our elected officials and policymakers. And that would be, I don't think we need help per se, but if we can do things to put that together, it's an incredible opportunity for the state.
Great, thank you. And Kelly, I believe, I think you believe, I think a lot of people believe that Wyoming has a tremendous opportunity to expand our markets as they're associated with, I'm going to use low emission natural gas. We can call it, you know, whichever one of those terms you want. So if you had one wish or two wishes of what both the federal government and the state of Wyoming could do to better incentivize those opportunities, what would they be?
Okay, I'll start with the feds. So under the Biden administration, the Department of Energy had been working on a international MMRV framework. We think that's important regardless of deregulation in order to allow U.S. producers to maintain competitiveness in the global markets. And so on the federal side, you know, mostly we want them to get out of the way, but there's a few material things that would be really, really helpful, and that international framework is one of those. From a state perspective, you know, I want to show some appreciation that the governor's been doing tremendous work with trade delegations, Japan, Taiwan. Those are really meaningful. Those are really helpful to really kind of communicate the opportunities that Wyoming can bring to the table for some of these countries. You know, again, I would echo what Joe said. We've got tremendous support in the state of Wyoming, and you know, just it's a tremendous place to be. You know, market development for something brand new is really, really challenging, but being in a supportive environment like Wyoming has been really, really helpful as we get this off the ground.
Great, thanks. My last question will be kind of a philosophical question. I'm going to start with you, Cindy, and then everybody will have the opportunity to weigh in. So as I mentioned, had the opportunity to work kind of across the country with different countries. Wyoming's traditionally been considered an ideal location to site traditional and emerging energy projects because of our regulatory certainty, our process certainty, all of the things that have allowed us to grow to the point that we are today. So do you believe that Wyoming is still the poster child of a place for people to come develop their projects? Why? And what could happen to change that?
That's an easy one for me. Absolutely, yes. 100% yes. But we have to be careful in how we handle, you know, future policy making. For example, we heard loud and clear yesterday at a meeting that we were both at, you know, as we have data centers coming to our state, as we continue to evaluate fiscal policy, the legislature right now is currently looking at tax exemptions. If the sales tax exemption goes away for data center, so does the industry. So we have to be really mindful and careful and look at what other states around us and how they're attracting business so we can maintain a competitive edge and continue to attract and support not only our existing legacy industries, but our emerging industries. But the answer, I think, is 100% yes.
I would agree, and I'll tackle the question from a differentiated gas perspective. Wyoming really is emerging as a leader in this space, and I think it's really thanks to partnerships like with the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality and the relationships that Cindy talked about, and building on those and coming up with really collaborative and innovative solutions going forward. So yeah, I would echo that hands down, yes. And in terms of who's participating in Wyoming, I mean, we've got, I'll name names. Jonah Energy is certainly participating in this market. We've got EOG, we've got some Powder River Basin producers. Wyoming really is emerging as a leader in emissions management and verified low carbon products. And so, yes, I think there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity. And again, those relationships are really, really important.
Certainly no disagreement here. I in every opportunity that I have to engage with folks, especially on the investor side of the equation that are new or learning about Wyoming, I always am evangelizing about the benefits of the state. We have the resources, I think, on a multi-level. You've got the natural resources. We've been talking about the importance of infrastructure. We have, I mean, incredible infrastructure that I think we all take for granted, but it doesn't exist in a lot of the developmental contexts, especially globally, and especially for the mineral side where you have to be where the resource is. I think we have the regulatory framework and the knowledgeable elected officials and policymakers that want to work within the confines of what it means to do business in Wyoming. And I think we have people with know-how to get it done, and a labor pool that works really well, and that legacy understanding of these industries.
Well, I don't know what's left after all those fine remarks, but I guess I'd say that on top of all of that, I have a perception from working in the utility regulation. You run into a lot of people from the rest of the West, and things are not approached in the Wyoming style reasonable and responsible way everywhere. I think that elsewhere around the country, your project might run into a lot more trouble and a lot more challenge, a lot more hurdles than it would in Wyoming, where there is a reasonable and responsibleness overlay, I think, over basically everything that goes on within the state's government, and from the state on down to the local governments. There's a bit of a can-do attitude there, and if it's a reasonable project and it's a responsible project, I think that your chances of success are excellent in Wyoming and relatively better than many other places.
Excellent, thanks. So I turn it over to audience questions now.
Okay, I have a lot of questions for all of you, but I'll just do one for now. Joe, I'm curious, so you have this resource, you're working, I think, with some support from the state, on developing the separations and value add process, but one of your first graphs you showed, China owns a huge portion of not just the production, but that separations process. And we've watched industry after industry kind of fail to their intervention and their ability to do price dumping. So I don't know if you pointed out what DOD or DOW has done with the operating mine in California, but is there anything the state can and should do, or is that a federal issue, or what has to happen to protect your market or your ability to produce at a fair price with responsible practices that would allow you to actually see that project end up commercially producing?
That's a really good question. Thank you. I'll certainly give you my opinion on it, and it's just that. I think if we unpack the deal with MP and the Department of Defense, one of the really interesting elements of it was a price floor. It was not granted across the market, but I think it's an interesting potential indicator of what could develop across the market. I think the graph that you referenced also demonstrates something else that's an opportunity that gets to the heart of your question. I think you're going to see a bifurcated market develop, and it's going to be China and ex-China. And that will, a lot of the things that Kelly talked about, where you can track where these minerals are coming and how they are processed, I think will be important to the industry writ large, whether you're in the upstream, downstream, or midstream portion of it. And then another way that we can move forward, which is more of just a contractual one, but once you get to that point and can provide certainty to customers and end users, because everybody has their very specific needs, then you can enter into a long-term offtake agreement, which allows you to know with certainty that you have a place to put your product. And that one is a little bit of the chicken and egg, but I think every project that you're seeing have success, regardless of industry, oftentimes that's a huge component of what they're doing is they mitigate the uncertainty by layering in some of those offtakes.
On the last question that the moderator asked on being the place for projects, we know of at least, or I can think of at least 3 projects that were either delayed or moved or put on hold because of energy-related issues. One being the Radiant project that went to Tennessee, the other being the Repsol Wind project that was denied by the Laramie County Commissioners, and the third being Project Bison that was put on hold because they couldn't get energy from Rocky Mountain Power. What ways can state regulators and private industry support the state and, or any other ways to stop those types of issues from happening? And is one of the ways we consider eliminating monopolistic territories in Wyoming?
I'll take a stab at that. I might put the monopoly territories in the parking lot, but to the other parts of your question, it's a very good question, and thank you for bringing it, because what we in this room and everyone we know can do is to help educate people about Wyoming and our resources and that common sense can-do-it approach that Commissioner Petrie talked about. We have a lot of out-of-state influence in our state now. And Wyoming people are very energy literate. You know, like for generations, this has been our livelihood. Our quality of life has been exceptional, thank you to the minerals industry. And to be able to educate about land, power, water, coal, oil, gas, wind, solar, nuclear, you know, just to be able to stop this like Facebook, social media narrative of nonsense and really get back to the facts. That's what we can be doing. We also can be encouraging our regulators that our industries need regulatory certainty. They cannot come and just have the pendulum swinging, excuse me, all over the place that, you know, when you're investing billions of dollars, you need certainty. So we need to be thinking about people who can be certain, be serious, be on a path of growth and trajectory for future generations, and really help drive that discussion in a very positive way.
I'll take a try at the monopolies component of the question. When we talk about the utility monopolies, they're a special kind of monopoly, which is a regulated monopoly. So when they acquire a monopoly territory, they also acquire an obligation to serve. There are practical and realistic limits to what they can achieve and how long it might take them, but they have to, under their obligation, if they, in exchange for that status as a regulated monopoly, they acquire an obligation to do the job, which is to provide safe, adequate, and reliable service in that territory at just and reasonable rates. Now, we are getting into, we have an ongoing discussion in the state about the possibility of other arrangements, including third-party generation arrangements. There is and always has been self-generation by industrial operations, and so I don't want anybody to have the idea that you've got a monopoly utility and whatever they want to do or however they want to do it is the end of the discussion. They have to behave as a responsible utility commercial citizen of the state. They have special obligations, they have special rights, and they have an expectation that they'll get a reasonable shake when it comes to recovering their expenses and earning a return on their investment, but they have to live up to their obligations.
We have a few minutes and one more question, or do we want to wrap up early? Temple, you're the boss.
Well, I think a longer break is always welcome, so maybe we should just take a break.
Sounds good. I appreciate the panelists. I sincerely appreciate your time and your willingness to come and have the conversation today. And let's get a round of applause for the panel.
Great, thank you. We will take a break. This break is sponsored by Beatty Wozniak. And since you have an extra 5 minutes, my task to you is to find a student and to talk to them about what they're doing and what they hope to do in the future. So, all right, thank you all.